Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the Doctor is In series. This is episode 229. I'm Chris Hadnaghi, CEO and founder of the Social Engineer LLC, the Institute for Social Engineering, and the Innocent Lives Foundation. I've been hosting this podcast since 2009. And since this is the Doctor is In series, we need a doctor because I am the very opposite of that. Well, we have Dr. Abbie Maroño on with us. Doc, nice to have you here.
Nice to be here, Chris. I'm Dr. Abbie Maroño. I'm a behavioral scientist, the Director of Education as a social engineer, and I have a PhD in psychology and behavioral analysis, and I'm an expert in nonverbal communication, trust, and the psychological mechanisms underpinning human decision-making.
Now, you might be wondering, is that funny? It's not. But here's what happens. Every podcast, I mess Abbie up. And I make up a new PhD, like something. I think the best one was the mating rituals of dust worms. That's her PhD, and now she can't remember what her PhD is in 90% of the time.
I remember, but every time I go to say it, I say it wrong.
So
you're like the devil on my shoulder.
I know, I am. You're welcome. Okay, so let's have a couple quick announcements. I am very excited about this announcement for this podcast. So, of course, we always promote social-engineer.com. You can check that out if your company is looking for social engineering services. But Dr. Abbie and I have been working on something for months. And when I say Dr. Abbie and I mean mostly her. But I'm really excited about the elicitation course that we're about to release. So we have been, since Abbie started with Social Engineering, we've been talking about producing some courses in elicitation because there's really nothing out there about it. And when I wrote my last book, Human Hacking, one of the comments that was made is that the chapter on elicitation was one of the only in the world that really covered it in the way that it was covered. So with Abbie's knowledge from all of her research and studies and the work that I've done as a practitioner in social engineering, we're combining those two things. And we're producing an audio course. So you might say, what is that? It's basically like a podcast, but a lot more professional. And you're going to be able to listen to, I think it's 8 chapters of education that will give you all the tips and tricks and the scientific principles that will help you become a master eliciter. And it's not just for social engineers. If you have to use elicitation tactics in anything, in any type of work that you have, whether you're a lawyer, you're a law enforcement agent, you're a teacher, a parent, whatever it is that you want, having good communication skills is something that can enhance that part of your life. That course is now out for pre-sale. So it's on the website. Go to social-engineer.com. You can hover over the training. And when you go down, that course will be there and you can check out when it will be launched. We're working really hard on getting the edits done and it will be up and available very, very soon. But I'm super excited about that. It's our first course that we did together. And just having gone through it and reading it, you are going to be amazed. You're going to love it. It's a really awesome course. And I'm not just saying that because I really had a very little part in it. Abbie did most of it. It is really great. So I'm really excited to hear what you think about it. Go check it out. Let us know. And I can't wait to see what you think after you take it too. And in addition, there's a certification for the course. So you don't have to take it. We're giving you the choice. If you want to be certified as a master elicitor, then you can sign up for the certification. And if you don't, you can just take the course and use the knowledge. So it's up to you on how you want to manage that. But we're going to have that available on the website as of now. So you can go check that out. Get your slot in for the pre-sale. And we look forward to hearing what you think about this brand new class from Social Engineer. Okay, let's talk a little more about some other announcements. If you really like the topic of social engineering, then you should join our Slack channel. Our team is in there every day, as well as 1,500 other people talking about all aspects of SE. We have practitioners, we have enthusiasts, we have people who don't even do anything in InfoSec for a living, but they're in there because they want to learn. It's a family-friendly legal channel. So if you're looking for something different than that, you should find another place to go. But if you're looking for family-friendly social engineering chat, then join us there. If you can't find the link in the show notes, then please hit up Abbie or I on LinkedIn. We'll be more than happy to help you get into that channel. Also want to invite everyone who's listening to take a moment to go to innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you're not familiar with the mission of Innocent Lives, or the ILF as we call it, we are both Abbie and I volunteer for that organization. And for the last 6 years, ILF's mission has been to help law enforcement geolocate, track people who traffic children. We actually go out and help law enforcement to be able to find those people that are hurting children, creating child abuse material, and then hand them over to the law enforcement agency so they can be apprehended and arrested. In the last 5 years, we've been able to work over 500 cases that got handed in. Those are the ones that actually came to completion and got handed into law enforcement agencies around the globe. So if you want to support that mission, you can do so by going to InnocentLivesFoundation.org. You can join us if you have some talents or skills or desire. We have many different needs. Like Abbie comes over and she writes really great articles for us and helps us with educational things that can make you understand the problems that are going on and how you can talk to your kids and even deal with maybe trauma and shame if you were a victim at one point in your life. And I volunteer over there helping and actually finding and geolocating those people who traffic children. So we have many different areas you can volunteer for. And of course, we're a nonprofit, so we can use your donations. So we look forward to seeing you over on the site. Also, if you like the music that's here in the podcast, if you're listening to it on Spotify or iTunes or iHeartRadio, then it is none other than the band Clutch. And I really want to encourage you to go listen to them. They're the best band on earth, regardless of what Abbie's face says right now. They're the best band on earth. They really are. And Neil Fallon, the lead singer of Clutch, helped me start the ILF. He actually was one of the founding members, and he helped me start the organization. They're huge supporters of ILF and huge supporters of safety for kids. So give them some love and go listen to them at pro-rock.com. And last but not least, if you like the information that you have here on the podcast, especially in this series for this episode, you can go down to the comments. You can leave us your questions you have, comments, give us a thumbs up or a like, depending on what platform you're listening to this on. So far, your comments and questions have been really encouraging for Abbie and I. And they really help us. Sometimes you give us topic ideas, and we want that too, so we can come up with new topics that you want to hear about, and give Abbie some chance to go do more research. And then she comes up with these great studies that we can discuss here on the podcast. And maybe you saw us talking about this on LinkedIn or some other place, but recently, we were privileged with being reached out by a law enforcement agent who was able to use one of our podcasts on the way to interview someone who was hurting kids. He was an actual arrested pedophile, and using some of the information that Abbie and I were talking about on one of our episodes, he was able to elicit a confession out of that person and save a lot of kids from being hurt. So things like that, when you tell us that, it really helps us to feel good about the work we're doing. And not that we're saying, hey, you need to give us compliments, but it just helps us to know that we're doing something good. We'd like to hear your feedback, even if there's something we can work on. So please continue to give it to us. We thank you for all the great comments there so far, and give us a like or a thumbs up. Okay, let's get on to our episode. So what are we discussing this month, Dr. Abbie?
We're going to talk today about mimicry.
Oh boy, we have to do this in 35 minutes. How are we going to do that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't either.
Absolutely no idea, but we do our best.
Okay, so let's just say I'm sitting here. I don't even know what the word you just said is. So let's start with the very basics. What is mimicry?
So mimicry can be considered under multiple terms. So we can talk about facial mimicry, which is the copying of someone's facial expressions. We can talk about vocal mimicry, and we've spoken about that before in the elicitation podcast, where you copy someone's speech or speech patterns, or, the words that they use, and postural mimicry. So copying your posture, or behavioral mimicry in general. So you say you're stood with your hand on your hip, and I see you stood with your hand on your hip, and I stand with my hand on my hip. Now, it's not necessarily intentional. Mimicry typically happens outside of awareness. So when I stand with my hand on the hip, I don't think, well, I'm going to do this position because I see you do this position. I just kind of do it. And it's driven by unconscious forces. And
does there have to be a rapport or a relationship for the mimicry to occur? Or is it just because I see someone standing with their hand on their hip, I'm going to start doing it?
Well, we tend to mimic most people in general. For example, the yawn is kind of a mystery. We don't know why we mimic yawns. It's so annoying. The answer is out there, but we just don't know it yet. But the function of mimicry is to facilitate harmonious relationships. Mimicry, the reason I get so excited about mimicry is because it serves a social glue function. And it's been called the social glue phenomenon. So it helps bind relationships together and facilitate harmonious communication. And there's a huge amount of research documenting the relationship between mimicry and social interactions and cooperation. Hence, it's more likely to occur in harmonious relationships too. So there's lots of studies done on therapists and patients, and people who observe a therapist-patient interaction, they then rate how much rapport they believe is between those two individuals. And if there is more mimicry, they believe there's more rapport. And then when you actually look at the self-reports of how much rapport they feel towards one another, increased mimicry is associated with increased rapport.
It's interesting because I know in the social engineering training, we teach mimicry as a tool that can be used. Right. But also a caution, like you don't want to be parroting somebody or make someone feel like you're mocking them, because you're like mimicking to such an extreme degree that someone feels like, wait, what are you doing? Making fun of me kind of thing. Like if I tried to put on a British accent, that would be a really horrible example of mimicry. I can do it if you want to hear it, but no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just kidding. We'll turn the whole UK will stop listening to this podcast. So
yes,
so we won't do it. But we talk about that in the training a lot because of how it could help build rapport, because then people that you feel like you're part of the same tribe because, hey, we're sitting the same way, or we have a similar facial expression, or we talk in the same RSVP, rhythm, speed, volume, pitch. So can it hurt if you do it too much? Can it hurt your relationship if you do it too much?
Yep. So there's a couple of points there. One, I'll mention timing. But first, we mimic those that we want to cooperate with, and those who we feel cohesive with. If the other person is a competitor or an outgroup member, so someone we consider to be in an opposing tribe to us, mimicking them would represent a bad choice. It would not be advantageous to mimic that person because we don't want to cooperate with that person. So engaging in mimicry of them could be costly and could actually damage the relationship. So if the relationship if the interaction itself is negative and you try and cooperate, if you try and mimic their behavior to increase cooperation, if you're not careful, it can have the opposite effect. It can actually decrease liking instead of increase liking.
That's an interesting point. So would you say that, and I'm trying to phrase the question, because when you were saying that, I started thinking, could someone do that without awareness? Like, could they find themselves mimicking and now it's hurting the relationship? But can someone do that without awareness? And then how do they catch themselves and go, oh, hey, wait, stop doing that, Chris. You're going to ruin this whole thing.
Mimicry tends to be driven by those positive feelings. We know that one of the psychological mechanisms that underpin mimicry is increased closeness. So it's unlikely that unconsciously, if you feel negative towards them and they feel negative towards you, that you are going to be mimicking them unless you do it purposefully. Because it's driven by that unconscious positive regard towards them. If that unconscious positive regard isn't there, you're not likely to unconsciously engage in it. The only reason why that could occur is if you're thinking, I'm going to use mimicry as a tactic to increase liking. Now that can be done. So if the interaction is not cohesive and you want to increase cohesion, you can use mimicry. But this is where that in-group, out-group really is important. If you are trying to create a cooperative environment, it's one tactic that can be used alongside other positive methods. But for example, if you are not trying to increase rapport in the way that you're speaking to them, and you just think, well, I'll mimic them, it's going to help me, it doesn't coincide with the rest of the interaction. So it's not one single thing that can be used to create cooperation. It's part of, the toolbox. And you do need to be careful with, if that is an out-group member, so you are direct competitors, then it's probably not advantageous to use mimicry in that situation.
Okay, and I'm going to tie in another podcast, and this is not a shameless plug, but and I know we didn't even talk about this topic pre-podcast, so now I'm like throwing new curveballs at you, so I hope it's not too much. Our podcast that we did on learned helplessness, where somebody who is maybe in an abusive relationship, but they do have feelings or an attachment to that abuser, right, because of that learned helplessness. Could someone like that find themselves with performing mimicry on the abuser?
So if they're trying to increase positive regard, yes. And there has been research done looking at dominance and submissiveness. And submissive individuals are the ones that are more likely to initiate mimicry of the dominant individual. And when we observe individuals, we can see who is more dominant in that interaction and who is more overbearing. And I guess who has the most power would be another way to phrase that, by the one that mimics the least, because they're not trying to get you to like them. They're not trying to increase the liking, whereas the other individual is. And there's other research looking at what happens once we've experienced a social loss or a social rejection. So if we try and become friends or try and initiate a conversation or an interaction or some kind of cooperation with an individual and we get rejected, then in our next interaction, we're more likely to increase mimicry levels, because now we're like, I've lost this thing. I have this low in my social interactions. I now need to increase my social standing. I now need to increase my closeness with others because I'm lacking. So now they're going to try and increase the mimicry. And it's really due to this sense of belonging. Needing a sense of belonging is such a human trait. You know, we all have it. We all need to belong. It's one of the most supported phenomena in psychology whatsoever. The fact that we need to feel like we belong, whether it's in a relationship or a group, we need that sense of belonging. So that is one of the things that drives mimicry. That's why we mimic those in the in-group, because we need a sense of belonging. We want them to like us. When we see someone we want to engage with, we want them to like us, it's driven by that sense of belonging. I'm more likely to increase mimicry. And after a social loss, that sense of belonging really has taken a hit. You know, we don't feel so much like we belong. So now the desire to belong is even more increased, hence why mimicry is more increased.
That's a really interesting point. Okay, so we're talking like a lot about the physical mimicry, but what about emotional mimicry?
So emotional mimicry is facial mimicry. People get a bit confused when it comes to behavioral mimicry, because facial mimicry and nonverbal mimicry is split. So nonverbal mimicry doesn't relate to mimicry of the facial expressions. That is specifically facial mimicry, otherwise known as emotional mimicry.
Okay.
And the reason is because the face elicits emotional information. So it works differently than the body, because the body doesn't elicit emotional information in the same way. Like, you can detect stress, you can detect distress and comfort, but you can't detect like happiness and sadness and things like that in the body per se. You can make an assessment of this person is in distress. We know by how someone walks, you can identify the likelihood of depression, but you can't detect emotions in the same way. So the psychological mechanisms that underpin emotional mimicry are slightly different, and they are more driven by things like trust, for obvious reasons of our facial expressions really indicate our intention towards others. When we show negative emotions, negative intent, positive emotions, positive intent. So they're slightly different. However, both do appear to be associated with increases in closeness. So we mimic people's facial expressions to increase closeness. But with emotional mimicry, it's also linked a lot to empathy. So we learn empathy very young. And one of the ways that we learn that is through mimicking our mother's facial expressions, because empathy is understanding how someone feels. And when we show an expression on our face, our facial nerve sends a signal to our brain to say, hey, this is how I feel, which is why, you know, we talked about fake it till you make it, why our facial expressions are linked to how we feel. When we mimic others, it's really important for that and what we call emotional contagion. We feel their emotions in ourselves. Facial mimicry is very, very important for that. So studies, I'm completely going off here, but I'm just...
That's okay.
But
I'm trying to stack up all the things I want to say, because it's like, oh, no. No, do it. It's so much. It's wonderful. I love this. I love when we do this on the podcast.
Sorry, I'm riding the wave. But studies looking at how young infants develop empathy, have shown that mothers who are more expressive and mimic their infant's face, and the infant mimics them, the infant later grows up with a better grasp of empathy. Now, if they lack that emotional mimicry early in childhood, it does stunt growth of empathetic understanding later on in adulthood and in young adulthood, because they haven't developed it during that really critical stage of brain development, where we are like just pure sponges. Obviously, we can develop empathy later on, but those early years are so critical for the foundations of who we are, because it's like a domino effect, really. They kick off how we now engage with others. They kick off how we now interact with others and how we read their behaviors, how we now feel towards them, how we then behave. Our behavior then affects how we feel. And it just becomes that part of that cycle. So we really want to have that early, interaction with mother and child of showing facial mimicry.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up the part about the emotion being shown on the face and not the body, because oftentimes, like in the social engineering class, students, we always warn them, like, don't do this, but everyone does it. I'm guilty of it, but they come in and they make judgments on the pictures or the videos that we show, and they assign an emotion to the person based on what they see in the body, and it's like, boy, I know when I'm nervous, I tend to, I don't know, and I tend to hold my hands like this. Yeah. And this, like holding your fist clenched, it could be an angry thing, but I'm not angry. I'm just nervous. So I tend to rub my knuckles, like, and if people are misinterpreting that emotion, like, oh man, he's angry, he's going to punch somebody. And it's like, no, I'm nervous. So this is what I do when I'm nervous,
What's interesting about that is, whereas the face is directly linked to those more complex emotions, we can identify shame and embarrassment and humiliation and happiness and surprise and everything in between. The body is linked to the expression of nervous system activation, which is why we can identify things like nervousness and anxiety and stress and distress and discomfort, because our nonverbal behaviors, just the body, not the face, are related to our fight, flight, and freeze response. So our nervous system is activated. So we're going to see behaviors associated with that biological change. We're going to see soothing behaviors. Because our nervous system is overactive, we need to now try and soothe that. When we engage in soothing displays, our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, calms down the nervous system or the sympathetic nervous system. And we're going to see mobilization displays. Because our body is in flight mode or fight mode, we're going to see behaviors that prepare us to engage in that. So we can get a lot from the body. And nonverbal mimicry is very, very effective for cooperation. Absolutely it is. But it is different than emotional mimicry. I always sound like I'm name dropping, but you brought it up, and it's just an important point. When I got the chance to work with Dr. Ekman, and I was having some struggles with understanding some of the expressions, he said to me, if you make the expression that you see, tell me what you feel. And it was an interesting experiment, right? Like, make the expression, and then how are you feeling? Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling scared? Like, what is the emotion that just happened? And he gave me this study that he did, I think it was in the 70s or something, 72, about how, like, making the facial expression actually creates the emotion. Like, you could do it, you could create that emotional content in you by just creating the facial expression and doing it right. You couldn't do it wrong. That's the big thing. Like, it's just, if you're doing disgust wrong, you're not going to feel disgust, right? But if you're doing it right, scientifically right, then you're going to feel that emotion. Yeah. And it just kind of blew me away. Like, that's the one thing that helped me, really understand facial expressions, was that when I was trying to analyze something, is almost in mimicking what I was seeing on the screen and then trying to say, okay, what am I feeling right now? And I thought that was it was a catapult forward for me in understanding this. Yeah, that's why, when we smile at someone and they don't smile back, instantly we're like, ooh.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't feel
right.
good.
You're like, what did I do wrong? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if, say, we lift our arm up and someone doesn't lift their arm up, we're not like, why didn't you just lift
that's
your
I love that analogy.
It's not
I love that analogy. You're 100% right. This has happened to all of us, but like, I think of, you don't want to think of adults that do this, but you think of like a little kid where you meet like a little kid at a party, like a family gathering, right? And you say, hey, nice to meet you. And they just kind of stare at you. It's such an awkward thing, where you're like, hey, how are you? And they just look at you and don't say anything. They're deadpan. You're almost like, this kid's a psychopath. He's going to kill me in my sleep. Yes. It makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. But that's why it's so important. We have like baby talk. And when we're with kids, we're like, overly expressive. And, it's kind of annoying. But it's so important because the kid needs to learn those expressions. So they need that response. They mimic an expression. You're like, oh, well done, amazing. And they're like, oh, wonderful. Kids can't say wonderful.
But they do with their face, right? Because as soon as you do that, they light up, right? It's, I was just watching a video. It was kind of funny. One of our people, Amanda, posted, she's playing with her little kid, right? And she's just throwing a blanket over his face and he's laughing. And now I'm sitting here, I'm not even, it's like a 30-second thing. And I'm laughing because I'm hearing him laugh. And I'm thinking of this while you're saying that, because it's like now there's this whole like emotional train going on and it's just from watching it. It's not even in person, just watching a video, Yeah. And it's like, it's almost impossible to not feel that or mimic that when you see it. Like you have to be really upset or something to do that, right?
Well, what's interesting is mimicry works from a third party perspective too. So in my PhD, I did my first 3 studies on in-person like pair interactions. And then the third one, because of the pandemic, I had to do everything virtually. And which is really difficult to do when you use motion capture systems and you work in a lab with multiple people. Oh, wait, it was just me in a lab, but I needed multiple people in my lab. So I had to kind of get creative. And it was a really good thing that I had to, because there wasn't a huge amount of research done on a third party perspective. And there was none whatsoever on virtual interactions.
Yeah, because before COVID, right? I mean, virtual interactions were all, like they were rare. Like having a Zoom meeting was like just a weird thing, and most people left their cameras off.
Yep. So we really didn't know, one, if mimicry was really that effective in a third party interaction, and 2, does it even carry online? So what I looked at was, if someone is in a meeting and the 2 other individuals in the meeting mimic each other, do they feel more cooperative towards those individuals? Because think about it in a business setting. If you have your business partner and then you have a client, you both, prior to the meeting, can coordinate your behaviors to make them more cooperative. You don't do anything to them. You are both just in sync. Can that increase cooperation? It can. It absolutely can. They were more willing to cooperate and share personal details with individuals who mimicked each other, and they observed that mimicry. And after the study, we gave them the option of, did you recognize any mimicry, or what did you think the study was actually about? When you enter a study in psychology and they go, we're looking at decision making, you're like, okay, you're going to look at and I told all my participants, I'm looking at puzzle solving abilities. And it's like I'm observing everything you do, and there is a one-way window, and I can see you and you can't see me. Like, they just know. So
that worked in the 60s, not anymore.
They leave the room and just say, what were you really looking for? And you're like, well, not what I told you. And then you have a debrief form, but on the debrief form, people tend to be motivated to be like, I knew what you were really doing. So you give them that sheet, and nobody ticked that they recognize mimicry. And if they had, I would have removed their data. Because
that's interesting. Yeah.
But nobody did.
Like you think about, like, you went into a room with some friends and maybe a couple, and they had an argument before they came. You didn't need to be there for the argument. You know it, right? You can feel it. The body language, the face, that old adage that you can cut the tension with a knife. It's like in the air. You don't know. They didn't need to say, I just had an argument with her. Like, it's like, yeah, I kind of know, right?
Yeah. But what is interesting is one of the only indicators of relationship longevity is mimicry. The longer we're with someone, the more we tend to be in sync with them. And even when there's a negative feeling, we're still more in sync. And I recently, I can't say too much about it because the video will be out, but the video that I recently recorded that will be out on YouTube, one of the things we had to do was detect how long people had been in relationships. My strategy was identify who mimics the most. And the one that had been in the longest relationship did mimic the most. I just abandoned my strategy when I gave my choice for, I no idea why I abandoned it.
That was a great strategy.
Great strategy.
That was genius.
And I literally said, this is my strategy. And I went into the assessment and was like, they show the most mimicry. Oh, well. And just
you ignored
didn't pick them.
So not scientific, Abbie. I don't know. Who are you? Were you drinking before that or what?
But it's a lesson. But the point was that was the only factor really that can be used to identify relationship longevity. I mean, that's a really hard thing to detect because of context. And like you said, they could have just had an argument. But even when there is negative feelings, there is that cohesion and there is just synchrony in their movements. And in one research study, they called it a behavior dance, where one person kind of flows and the other flows with them. And the funny thing is, it kind of moves from mimicry to being in sync. So mimicry, one does one and the other does it. There is a time lag. And I forgot to mention about time lag earlier because that's really important. But there is a time lag. When there's no time lag and things happen at the exact same time, it's synchronous and it's occurring at the same time. And that's more likely to happen when people are married rather than when it's early stage relationship where there's more attraction and there's more attempt to increase attraction. That's where mimicry is most likely because it's a tactic, even conscious or unconscious. But going back to that time frame before I forget once again, when you mimic someone, the time in which you do it is really important. Because if you're using it as a tactic to increase liking or increase cooperation, if you mimic within 1 to 3 seconds of them showing that behavior, it can decrease liking. Because it's like you said, they see, they're like, what are you doing? And it becomes not mimicry, but mocking now. So it actually reduces that positive feeling. If you mimic over 10 seconds after, it stops becoming mimicry. And it's just you showing that behavior.
Wow. So there's a definite time period that is like, like you gotta, if you're doing this on purpose, you better be having a stopwatch while you're doing that, But
if you mimic 5 plus or minus 2, so 3 to 7 seconds, that's really the mimicry sweet spot of when it's not too overt and it's not too, 10 seconds is a little bit lazy to be mimicking that.
I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do the arm thing because he's doing it, whatever, So I guess I would imagine then when it's not planned that our brains just have that automated system to say, hey, this is the perfect time to start doing that.
Yeah, when I had to do that study for my PhD, I was in a meeting with my 2 supervisors at the time. And I said to one of my supervisors, Paul, that I didn't think mimicry would happen online. And I said, well, there's no point looking at it in virtual interactions because it's not going to have the same effect. And he just said, really? Because right now you're mimicking Stacey. And I really liked Stacey. She was someone that I very much looked up to, someone that I definitely wanted to like me, someone who I had a lot of respect for. So she would be a prime, I don't say target, but she'd be a prime person that for me, I would want to mimic because she'd be someone that she was my in-group because she was my supervisor, but she's also someone that I would have wanted to become closer to. So she would have been the ideal person to, and there's a power difference too. So she was the higher up and I'm the more submissive lower up. So I'm more likely to mimic. And when he said that, he said, well, you're mimicking Stacey. And I had changed my posture, my hand position, my hip. I was in the exact same position as her with the exact same movement, completely unconsciously. And when he said that, I just laughed and was like, okay. And
point proven.
then did the study. Yeah, I was
yep,
like, okay,
you win. But I love when that kind of stuff happens, like where it's, the lesson is in the immediate moment. Like, how can you argue it? It's just too perfect.
One thing we haven't covered is when we talked about emotional mimicry, it obviously depends on mimicking someone's emotions. That depends on being able to read their emotions.
Oh.
So the notion that mimicry of emotional expressions is effective cooperation, it depends on recognizing how they feel. So if I want to mimic your behavior, if I don't recognize what emotion you are showing me, I'm not going to be able to mimic it correctly.
So would it be accurate to say that that the folks who have like a neurodiverse type of thinking that may have struggles in reading facial expressions, like I think of maybe autistic people who have they have to learn, like almost study how to read facial expressions because that's not something that is natural for them, then mimicry would be harder for them. Would that be an accurate hypothesis based on that?
Yeah, so they're not very good at picking up on social signals.
Right.
And there's a similarity between individuals who have schizophrenia or psychosis in general and those who have autism.
Really?
Because there is a deficit in reading social signals. And what research has shown is they look at the wrong things. So when I look to identify how you're feeling, I'm going to look, in your eyes, I'm going to look at your mouth. And studies have shown when they ask individuals with autism to watch a film and then, or I think it was either film or two people interacting, and then identify how they're feeling and they look where they look, they're looking in the wrong places. Or they say, how does this individual feel about the film they're watching? They'll look at the film, then they'll look at the individual. And using eye tracking, they see where they look. And when they ask, how does this individual look at the film? They look back at the film. They look at the individual in the wrong places and then look back at the film to identify that. So there is this idea of, are they lacking in that ability to recognize facial information, or are they just not able to because they're not getting in the right information to make that assessment? So if they were looking in the right places, could they have the ability to make the right assessment? But it's really difficult naturally every time you're interacting to say, hey, only look here, only look here. Now, it's a very unnatural thing to do. So there is some questions about that. Yeah. But we have to be looking in the right places. It's like I talk about the lower body and detecting distress in the lower body. If you can't see the lower body, how are you going to detect it? If it's being shown in foot behaviors, you could be a world-class observer. Yeah. If you can't see it, you can't see it.
In this medium, it's impossible.
You can't use it. Yeah. It's like me saying, how many hands am I holding up? It's been a long day.
How many hands are you holding up, Abbie? I see 5 hands.
How many fingers am I holding up behind my back? You could be a world-class observer. You can't see them. You don't know.
But I know the answer. It's always 1.
I was going to hold up 2.
Ah, darn. No, of course I don't have science to back any of this up. But I had a chance to work with a young man who was autistic and reading facial expressions. And what you said was interesting because he was able to do it once I was able to help him to see where to look to see happiness or anger or fear. He's great at it. He's amazing. But at first he wouldn't. He was not. It was always like he was looking at here to try to determine what people were feeling, and then he was just disconnected. But getting him the right locations, he was able to do it without an issue. So it wasn't like he didn't have the capability. It was just kind of putting him in that direction.
That's the thing. They look at the wrong places for the cues. So they could never make an accurate assessment if they haven't got the right information coming in. It's like if you say, how do I feel, but only look at my nose and my ears. Yeah,
not going to help.
I'm not going to be able to make an accurate assessment. If there is a deficit in that understanding and that natural tendency, we don't think about, well, I'm going to read your emotion by looking here and here. We just do it unconsciously. So unless I'm consciously trying to change where I'm looking, I'm just going to keep interacting with you as I naturally do. And individuals who have autism, they might not have that awareness of I'm looking in the wrong places, because for them, it's just like it is for us. It's unconscious. Yeah. We just make those assessments based on the information that we're taking in. So it is really positive in the light that there is training possibilities. And we know behavioral training is highly successful for individuals with autism, just like it is for individuals with psychosis to a certain degree. Obviously, there's different issues there, whereas individuals with autism are a lot more responsive to these kinds of trainings.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I see why it was going to be a problem, but we moved pretty quick, and we covered our.
I mean,
I know there's so many more. We could have went off on 80 more tangents.
Yeah. We haven't even gone through mimicry of specific body parts and the effects.
That means we have to have an episode 2 about this, which is why I think it's great. I think it's great because a lot of our topics, I think we can revisit them like in a 6 months, 8 months, a year, and go, well, we didn't cover. Let's do an advanced level of that one, because that this is a fascinating topic, and there's a lot there that I think can really help people.
This is like the intro to mimicry, because we haven't covered how to utilize mimicry in negotiations yet.
I was literally just about to say, and I was thinking law enforcement, so I wasn't thinking negotiations, but I was thinking another episode would be great in how we can help law enforcement agents use this during interview, not interrogation.
Well, I have done studies on the use of mimicry in investigative interview context.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I mean, I was just thinking about that wonderful agent that reached out to us to thank us. Like, imagine now giving a podcast on how to use this exact topic for them, how helpful that would be for, and really for anybody. I mean, anyone who's doing interviews for any reason, even a HR person who's got to do interviews, how it would be amazing to be able to utilize these skills and understand them.
And for interviewees.
Yes. Wow. That was like you were like Bruce Lee right there with that cat, by the way. So anyone listening had no clue what happened, but a cat just zoomed into the meeting at 750 miles per hour. And Abbie put her hand up and like, and stopped it. It was amazing.
I didn't hurt my Darwin.
Yeah. He's now laying in little pieces on the floor because of how quickly she stopped him. Okay. Just kidding, everyone.
So being out of the way for the whole shot.
It was great. I mean, you did good. Okay. This was a great topic. I'm glad that I'm glad that you brought this one up. Was this ours or was this a guest?
This was me.
I know some of them are yours, some of them are mine, and some of them are guests. So, but I like this one. This was a really, really good one and a really great topic for us, especially coming with our elicitation course. I think like this can be a whole nother topic added to things like that when we update it. So just, really awesome. As always, Abbie has given a lot of reference points on this. So they will be in the show notes for anyone who is interested in seeing where our discussion points came from. And you can go and look up those different research papers. She has like a page full, so they'll all be there in the show notes. And as always, we said before, leave us some comments, likes, thumbs up, and any other topics you want to see. And for next month, Abbie, what are we going to be talking about?
We are going to talk about music and the senses. Yeah,
this is one of mine. I love this topic. I do. I find the link between music and us just to be so fascinating, and I can't wait to actually discuss all of this in our depth. Okay, well, thanks, Abbie. It was another good one.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining us this month. Until next month, stay safe. We'll see you then. See ya.